This conference will now be recorded.
Excellent. So thank you all for coming along today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Zoe Wormald and I'm a senior engineer with TfL, and I have been now for many a year. And in recent years, I have got involved, I think luckily, with a number of depot jobs on LU. So probably for about the last 10 years, and mainly as a result of either the introduction of the S-Stock or in terms of signalling upgrades. So as a result, have become a little bit of a depot specialist, I would say. And so when back in, and I was a bit terrified to see this, it was October 2018, I was asked whether or not I'd have a look at some drawings for DLR. I jumped at it, I thought, brilliant, that sounds good. We were just in a pan TfL world in terms of starting to sort of help out with the other areas of TfL other just within LU, and so I thought, yep, that would be great. And so that's how I ended up involved in the project, and the rest is history, really. So in terms of the talk that I'm going to give today, it is in relation to the rolling stock replacement program, and because of the work that I've been doing mainly as a discipline lead in reviewing the track design, I'm going to sort of focus on that, but not so much in sort of critiquing the design or anything like that, but just my experience and the things that have sort of come up as while we've been doing that, and linked in a lot with sort of the DLR and DLR standards. So I will get on with it. Let's go. So this is basically what I'm going to look to cover, and part of that is actually understanding, you know, the reasons why the rolling stock replacement program is happening, what the sort of the timetable changes as a result of the introduction of the new stock and the increased frequencies, and then the work at Beckton, the design interfaces, focusing again on the sort of track aspect, and then a little bit about the DLR S&C, and then talking about the sort of the different phases for Beckton and the installation issues that we can see we're having. So again, this is a live project. We're sort of, although it's been going quite a long time, we're on site, and designs are still developing. So I'm aware of that, and I'm not the designer. As I say, I'm just I've been involved in the review. So again, it's sort of I'm not presenting design drawings. These are sort of sketches that I've put together, but hopefully you'll get a gist of the project. So as I say, in terms of understanding why the project's happening, it's important to actually think about where the DLR started. And so on this slide, you can just see the original DLR map from its opening in '87, and sort of the fact that at that stage, you know, it really was a light railway, developed with the Docklands Development Corporation in terms of providing a cheap form of transport for redevelopment of the Docklands area, and sort of at that point, sort of only really taking sort of 6 million journeys per annum and 11 trains, with the sort of depot maintenance facility based at Poplar. So that's where we started, and at that point, Canary Wharf and the surrounding area very much was just coming out from its sort of sort of industrial and Docklands heritage. And then over time, the area around Docklands has grown probably more than anybody could possibly have thought at the time, I think, with further extensions through to Beckton in 1994, Lewisham in 1999, and I also one of the reasons why I wanted to do the job or get involved was because I was a site engineer on the Lewisham extension, and enjoyed my time there. So again, a link to it. And then in terms of then further extensions in terms of City Airport and Woolwich Arsenal, and then in terms of up to Stratford. And again, sort of other things have been going on at the same time. So obviously the opening of the Millennium Dome and the links in with the Jubilee Line extension, which also opened in 1999. And then the boost and the development requirements and access and transport links required for the Olympics sort of have culminated with sort of passenger journeys now pre-COVID at around 120 million. So the growth, that whether that was expected or not, has been immense. And the DLR now interfaces with the Jubilee Line, City Airport, overground, the cable car again, which was used during the Olympics, and will have interfaces with the Elizabeth Line. So in addition to that growth, and I've just got some figures here in terms of past growth. So the key area that I think the initial DLR served, and a lot of some of the other extensions sort of cover Tower Hamlets, and the population in the time that the DLR has been in existence has basically doubled. So the growth that has sort of, I think the DLR has helped to develop and is also serving, and that's not stopping. And I don't think COVID necessarily will particularly change that. And so we've got we know of additional homes and jobs expected within the Isle of Dogs, Stratford, Royal Albert Docks and Silvertown. And so the redevelopment and the rolling stock replacement programme is there in terms of supporting that growth, and to provide public transport systems and access to these areas. Just in terms of this map, I mean, I found this, and it's just, I found astonishing really the fact that sort of we're talking about sort of 6 miles to 8 miles in terms of the sort of area in that this sort of covers. And I live in Tower Hamlets, and I have to say that the rate of growth is astonishing. And if you've been around the Stratford and the Olympic Park, you know, sort of the Olympic Park itself seems to disappear over time, and it's become more and more developed. So in terms of the Docklands Light Railway rolling stock replacement programme, it covers a number of things. So we're talking about just primarily in terms of, as the name suggests, replacement of the rolling stock. So TfL basically have procured an additional fleet of 43 trains. These would be the walk-through type, similar to the S-stock that's been introduced onto LU. And so we're looking at replacing the existing B92 stock, which have come to their end of life. And so the works, this is basically the works associated with bringing the new stock onto the system and the infrastructure upgrades that are required to do that. And again, within TfL, because we've had that recent experience with bringing in the S stock, there's quite a good mirroring of skills and experience that can be shared. So in addition to the sort of the rolling stock scope, so as I've said, we've got the 43, and then in addition to that, TfL have gained an additional £260 million funding from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So I think that's now the levelling up sort of government department, where in terms of supporting the additional sort of the infrastructure for additional 12,000 homes. So in addition to the 43 that were originally being procured, there's now another 11 for what is called the HIF project. And the trains are being built in Spain by CAF, and the first train is due to sort of in service towards the end of 2023, which really doesn't seem very far away now that we've started 2022. Oh, we're not there. Yes, we are. 2022. So, thank you. Then, in addition to the trains themselves, so there's then the Beckton Depot work. So there needs to be somewhere to actually store and stable these trains, so and to maintain them. So that is essentially what the Beckton Depot scope is. So it is due to extend the southern sidings and the northern sidings, the construction of the maintenance shed, there's a new test track, train wash facility, and then in terms of all the power upgrades, there's a new substation. Likewise, in terms of the other infrastructure upgrade works that are required for the project, there's obviously some additional Thales signalling upgrades for the signalling system, power upgrades, station upgrades in relation to increased capacities and safe evacuation routes, etc. Telecoms upgrade, changes to mirrors and monitors and signage, and in terms of also the review of the train arresters, the existing train arresters on the system, and any upgrades required for them. And then obviously linking in with track gauging, PTI, and also the overall track impact study on the introduction of the new trains. So in terms of the increase in service that's going to be sort of phased in, there are sort of 4 key phases, and one of the first of those, they've sort of classes in terms of summer 22, which sort of assumes a couple of things in terms of that COVID generally will be sort of behind us, which I guess is no guarantee. And also in terms of the Elizabeth line opening and tying with that. So so that yes, the initial sort of baseline in summer 22 is based in terms of train frequencies, is looking at this sort of first one, and some of those, in order to increase the frequency of the trains, especially in terms of where it's tying in with the Elizabeth line, I think, is where they've dropped the number of cars down to 2 from 3. Then in September 2024, when the first 11 trains arrive into service, there's then looking to increase the service through service from Stratford down to Woolwich Arsenal, in terms of up to 15, and likewise a through service down from Stratford to Lewisham, increasing from 15 to 22.5. And again, another step change in February 26. So at that point, the so the main phase was in terms of the replacement of the existing B92 stock. So there's no actual increase in service. It's just the replacement of those stock. And then finally, with the introduction of the HIF, there's then again a service increase, focusing on the sort of with the additional trains down to Lewisham, and again on the Stratford, Woolwich Arsenal route. So in terms of the Rsrp timeline, it's really a case of the sort of the key things that sort of going on at the moment. So obviously the sort of the rolling stock program, the depot works, the infrastructure works, and HIF. And generally through COVID, the rolling stock program has kept relatively on time. The issue being that sort of for Beckton Depot works, that sort of COVID has had quite a sort of big impact. So we're really just sort of trying to work to ensure that we can take those first trains and do the testing and etc. required and bring them to the UK and get them built and out onto the network. So this spring, couple of months' time, I think the first CAF train is due to start dynamic testing in Spain, and then, as say, due to enter service back in December 23. The northern sidings build is on site, and we I'll show some photos of that later on in terms of the progress. And last weekend, in fact, the project took possession of the first section of the existing northern sidings depot track, so taking operational sidings out of use in order to incorporate into the work site. The southern sidings and the MFB sort of works will follow. The southern sidings design having been completed, and the MFB likewise having reached no bus acceptance at Christmas. And then the HIF design, the concept design, is just about to start. There has been a number of changes in terms of the sort of the way that the works were due to be built, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So in terms of the new B23 stock, as I say, they're a walkthrough design, and when I was sort of looking at this, so sort of I know from the works that we did previously about sort of bringing on a new stock, especially from a track perspective. We used to have sort of the changes in shoe gear positioning and changes in sort of the gapping issues associated with that and having to check. Obviously changes in traction loads, from PTI, the door positions changing, and also in terms of in this case, this is the first of the DLR trains to actually include anti-climbs on the front of the train in terms of provision to interact with train arresters. So lots of things to sort of consider in terms of the redesign. And one of the things I looked at was just in terms of the difference between the B23 and the other stocks. So as you can see in terms of the length, the B23 really has only increased in length from 86.4 to 86.7, so a relatively small distance. But the formation of the train is the thing that's particularly different. So whereas previously the B92 and B2007 stocks would operate as a 2 or 3 car units, the B23s will be a 5 car fixed unit operating across the system. And as such, that's why they sort of are being and requiring a separate maintenance facility. Obviously, the trains being sort of requiring sort of different equipment and sort of lifting requirements. So in terms of the weights, that again, over time, the weights of the trains have slowly increased. These trains will be air conditioned, so there's additional equipment there. And in terms of just trying to keep the weights down, I know sort of there's a lot of back and forth in order to get that to the point. And I've put the S7 stock again, sort of just again thinking about the volume of traffic and the number of journeys that these trains are seeing. I was just interested to see sort of how S7 compare to them. So certainly the DLR still continue to be a lighter stock. I've sort of put an equivalent weight for it's not very scientific, I know, but for the S stock compared to the B23s. So yeah, so the S stock is still very much a heavier train. Likewise, in terms of the number of passengers that they're holding, again, the B23s, you can see with the interconnecting carriages, sort of massively help to increase the number of passengers that they can carry. But again, not as much as the S7. Yeah, I did have to look up in terms of the definition of what light rail really means, because it dawned on me while looking at the number of passengers that PWI now, the DLR now take, was whether or not it's still classed as light rail. But the definition on the that's available is fairly vague, and I think in terms of the train, sort of weights and the speeds that they're going at, we can still classify as light rail. But I'd be interested to hear what other people think about that, because I think the DLR is on the verge in terms of the passenger numbers of being a bit different. So being a bit skeptical, and sort of when the designers came through with swept envelopes, etc., for the trains, for the designs, I did have a look myself in terms of just seeing how this longer stock with interconnecting carriages works in terms of the standard DLR swept envelope. So here all I've done is I've just put the sort of the CAD assessment that I had a look at for various curves down to the sort of 40 meters, which is often used on DLR. So the train basically uses a standard 10-meter bogey centers, so that hasn't changed. Likewise, the train width remains constant, but essentially the new interconnecting sort of the new train sort of narrows at the interconnecting gangway, which helps it sort of meet the sort of limits of the DLR swept envelope. And likewise, the shaping at the front of the train sort of gives that clearance. And the overhang has also been reduced slightly. So yeah, I satisfied myself that it was definitely gonna fit within it. So Beckton Depot. The depot is located on the site of the old Beckton Gasworks, which was built to manufacture coal gas and sort of operated for close on 100 years, and only closed at this point when North Sea natural gas basically took over. I see that Beckton was also the sort of last place to be switched over to natural gas as well, with the gasworks there. And then the depot opened in 1994, which was sort of linked in with the Beckton extension, and over time has sort of had further developments, both to the north and the south. And again, the existing maintenance shed was extended in 2016. So you can see the close proximity to the Thames, and also the sort of the remains of the gasworks, and so very much a brownfield site, and issues associated with the outflows towards the Thames, and any drainage issues and contaminants. So for those of you who don't particularly know Beckton Depot, essentially the depot is located between Beckton and Galleons Reach stations, and we've got here sort of Armada Way, which sort of runs around the outside, off which there's a main entrance into the depot. And then I've just highlighted here the existing, so you've got the existing maintenance shed, wheel lathe, there's control centre, and the sort of welfare facilities for staff within that area. And then the existing southern sidings and northern sidings, and the sort of entry off the main line track coming up. So in terms of how it was intended that these works would be installed, the southern sidings design was started first, and the intention always was to complete the build of this as a first phase. Which I'll come on to the details of which later on. The next stage was due to be the northern sidings, and from that there's going to, with access for undertaking the works, and also a permanent access to the north in order to service train wash from the northern side. And as you can see, it's taking up some of the existing sidings as well. Then the MFB and the new maintenance shed essentially was going to is coming up to the existing shed to the south of it. And during the construction works, because essentially it's going to be surrounded by operational track, another temporary site entrance will need to be created in order to access it. One of the issues that we're trying to sort of work through now is in relation to sort of having the test track operational while still trying to gain access to the MFB. And then the HIF works will be a further extension to the south of the southern sidings. And again, we'll have a connection closer up towards Galleons Reach station. So very much in terms of the size of the current depot, consider sort of at least doubling in size. So from a track perspective, there have been a number of key track interfaces for me. So as I say, my role within the project has essentially been in terms of undertaking design reviews, and also in terms of getting involved as part of TfL engineering in terms of doing additional work and assessments for the project. So I'll talk about that aspect of it first of all. So from the TfL engineering have provided resource in terms of one, undertaking, as I say, the existing train arrest assessments, fouling point assessments for Thales in order for them to undertake their signalling checks. We're also getting involved in terms of the gauging and clearances and the assessments for DLR, and have provided input into the studies for those in relation to the introduction of the new train. We're also doing the track impact study, and also in terms of developing the rail and S&C specification for the project. There's been a number of consultants undertaking the design. So CH2M did the feasibility design. That was back in 2018 that I think that got signed off. And then AECOM have been undertaking design for the southern sidings and the northern sidings, and Arcadis, the MFB design, and due to the HIF concept design. Then obviously we've had DLR engineering, and again I want to talk about those a little bit in more detail later on, who've assisted in terms of both doing design reviews, but also in terms of clarifying standards and giving design requirements for the project. And obviously their sort of principal role in terms of the change assurance panel in terms of approval of the works. Likewise, along with CAD, who've also sort of done a very similar role, but obviously from the franchisee's point of view. And then Mott MacDonald's were employed as a sort of outside party to review the packages alongside for the CAP sign-off and to give any input and query any of the design decisions to ensure that they were secure. So Buckingham Group and the subcontractor Sonic Rail have been contracted for the northern sidings build, and as I say, they're on site now. And then in terms of long lead items, the TfL have directly procured both the S&C and the running rails. And to be honest, it's been a very fortuitous thing given COVID and the changes to the program that we've had. So as much as I had other experience in terms of depots and S&C, DLR S&C was a bit of a new thing to me when I arrived. So just sort of done a sort of quick sort of introduction to the key S&C units that have been used on the design. So essentially, because of the nature of the depot, just like with our depots on LU, we're using sort of really tight radii S&C. So lots of these in terms of the SV-CV40s, which is essentially just a 40 meter radius turnout off of straight main, and then two sort of slight variances on that in terms of the unequal split, which is essentially just off a curved main in order to give a minimum radius of 55 meters. The significance of which was just to enable sort of Conrail, DLR Conrail to be installed on the inside of the curve. And then the one in 5.187, again, is a standard SV-CV40 switch, but then with curve crossing legs, again, just to help with minimizing space and keeping the sort of the curve track in locations where you need curve track coming off the back of the crossing. And then for sort of areas where we have the space, a CV100, again, just a constant 100 meter radius off the straight main. And in comparison to some of the sort of, just as a sort of thinking about how these relate to standard switches, so I've just sort of put up here in terms of lead length. So AV6, obviously they generally have a sort of not constant 100. We're talking about the switch radius of about 145, aren't we, at that point? So we sort of got a lead length of 17.4 and an A6, a bullhead A6, which is roughly about the same as the CV100. So again, turnouts used to sort of to minimize space and help us out in the depot geometry. So yeah, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but essentially the southern sidings S&C have been procured with hardwood bearers, and then later on the northern sidings that got changed to composites, but I will talk about that in a second. So in terms of the southern sidings, would have been a fantastic set of works to start with on site. They just were looking at sort of 3 new sidings and some tie-ins to a couple of sidings of the existing sidings to the north of it. Very straightforward, straight platforms for the full length, 0 cant, level sight, and essentially the sort of driver access walkways sort of for the full length of them, and sort of separated from the existing depot, so it would have been relatively straightforward to get to. The original design did also include a test track for the existing stock, because it's part of the works we'd be removing an existing test track that was available to the depot. So as a result, that was included. However, because of COVID, plans to actually undertake these works first had to change, because the priority had to be in terms of building the MFB, being able to accept the stock and arrive. And obviously this wasn't creating quite so many stabling berths. So the northern sidings then got prioritised. However, we were far enough advanced in terms of the design and in terms of getting it signed off, that we sort of were proceeding through in terms of getting tenders, etc. So one of the things that actually identified was the fact that although on the original design we'd specified concrete sleepers for the plain line sections, the nature of the way that DLR has been built in the past meant that when we did finally track down sort of the molds that were used on the last extension, they were found to be in such a poor condition that we would have had to have got new molds made for the concrete sleepers. And given the timescales when we thought originally we were due to be going to site, and also the volumes that we were likely to be using, we sort of decided in the end that we wouldn't go down that route. So it was just sort of agreed that, and working with DLR Engineering, that we would swap that over to for the use of composite sleepers and for the specification. It was also the sort of first introduction I had in terms of needing to sort of put together the rail order, which for DLR, if you're aware, so as well as using the ATA for the S&C, generally specify use of a modified head for plain line track. So that was an additional thing to contemplate and take into consideration, and just again in terms of trying to get the orders placed for when we needed originally to be building the S&C, we had to borrow ATA rail from DLR in order to actually get the S&C built. So we placed the contract with Progress for the development of the drawings, and there was also the opportunity to take into consideration the new switch profile and switch planing that DLR had been developing as a standard drawing, so that could be incorporated. And likewise, they had just got approval in terms of a new teal structure bar. So again, that was able to be incorporated into the requirements for Progress. Okay, let's go. So yeah, so one of the things I was quite interested by was the fact in terms of who, because when the issue relating to the concrete sleepers came up, the question was, well, who else would potentially be using these, and who else could I talk to about whether or not we could sort of get something. And so I ended up sort of phoning up sort of links in Croydon Tramlink to ask about sort of what they had, not realising that they used a different type of rail. And so yeah, so this is just a table of the different light railway systems, or some of the light railway systems currently, and the round, and what type of rail that they're using. And so you can see we've gone for a variety of different things around the country. And in terms of sort of the ATA, sort of DLR and also Manchester Metrolink have some. And then although the West Midlands Metro and the Nottingham Express Transit and Sheffield Supertram have ATA rail, they have an inclination for 1 in 40. So in terms of concrete sleepers, obviously that wouldn't quite work. So yeah, I was just interested about who uses what, and potentially who we could team up with, and also obviously in terms of DLR, there's quite a few. We're getting to the point in terms of their track now, the ballasted track, some of the original track, which is sort of getting to the point of being life expired. So what do we want to use in the future? Will we be able to sort of, if we want to develop a concrete sleeper for ATA, then yeah, what do we want to look at? And it could be that we just go for a different design, because I think there are other design options up there, but they're just not approved by DLR at the moment. So in terms of the northern sidings work, again, the initial part of it, as you can sort of see, I've just sort of overlaid, I've got the sort of proposed alignment over the existing depot track here. And so you can see that the sort of the furthest, the northern side of it is available without interfacing or interfering with the existing depot and its operations. So that obviously in terms of construction has been a real benefit. So the northern sidings consist of 13 new sidings, 24 3-car berths and 4 2-car berths. So this is obviously an old language in terms of the existing trains. And there's also a tie-in, the design into sort of 3 of the existing northern sidings roads. So there is a massive 26, well, I think it's massive, 26 S&C units, and certainly in terms of going through the 1 in 50s for each of those, it's been quite a task. And we've got a sort of as I say, a mixture of CV40s, SV40s, CV100s, and the unequal splits, and the 1 in 5.187s. So and in addition, we got the sort of train wash at the, oh, it's moved a bit, the train wash at the northern end as well. So in addition to all the sidings, the general sidings, there was also a requirement to put in a test track. And so the test track that they've been able to sort of position such that it runs all the way around the outside of the depot. So this is around sort of 640 meters long, and was hoping to get up to speeds of 50 kilometers an hour on part of the straight. And some of the requirements essentially was to have a combination of various different track forms that the trains would see out on the main. So there's a combination of both 113 and ATA rail on the test track. So essentially this side of the connection from the depot into it being 113, and then the ATA being on the eastern side. In terms of the different track forms as well, as you can see, we've got some fairly tight radii. So at the top here, we're at about 90 meter radii with 100 mil cant on the ballasted track. And then we've got a 95 meter section of slab track on the eastern corner. So on ballasted, the cant is limited to 100 mil on ballasted track. So as a result, where the speed required the additional cant of 120 on 65 meter radius, that's ended up as slab track. And that's going to be a continuous slab with adjustment switch with unstressed welded rail and adjustment switches at either end. Friction arresters are proposed both ends of the test track, and because it's going to be ATC specifically in relation to it being ATC signalled, which is a requirement of the DLR standards. Talking to signal engineer, we're still waiting for the Thales signals design and to actually fully understand where the trains and how far in advance of the train arresters the trains will need to stop. So we'll have to be we've still got the assessment to have a look at in terms of what speeds, actual speeds, we're likely to achieve on the straights, and looking at the risks associated with this being a test track and the risk of overspeeding. So in terms of, again, my involvement and the things that had to deal with during this part of the review of the design, again, because we were ordering all the rail, a mixture of rail that we needed to get in, and significant amounts. And we actually due to Brexit, I came across the first time import quotas. So we thankfully, again, with COVID, we weren't so pressed in terms of the timescales that we needed to get rail into the country. But essentially, we'd reached the quota that was allowed to be brought in for Q2 or whatever. So we had to wait our delivery in order to avoid an additional 25% of import tax. So yeah, that was a first for me in terms of having that come through. And then, because of the change in the way that we were building the site now, it meant that essentially we were looking to reuse as much of the S&C that we'd already had constructed for the southern sidings on the northern sidings. Thankfully, and this is where the consistency and standardization of the DLR S&C comes to play its part, we were then able to play S&C jigsaw and essentially see which units we could use at different points in the new northern siding setup. So that's sort of working out what we could reuse, have sort of get it out of storage, and any changes that we need to do. So a couple of places the sole plate would need changing, and sides and things like that, but generally they were relatively small issues. Again, worked with the designer in terms of the review of the access platform stepping distances. So at the top of the northern sidings on the test track, the access platform is just on the sort of the transition. So as a result, just making sure that for sort of people using it weren't going to end up having to have a ridiculously large step. They're access platforms, they're not passenger platforms, so we were already keeping distances to the platforms relatively large, so it wasn't a case of striking, it was just ensuring that the stepping distances weren't too great. Again, something that sort of came in here, which didn't particularly on the southern sidings, just the and something that I'm not particularly used to in terms of LU, and I think myself and the designers, we sort of try to work through this together with the help of DLR engineering, but sort of getting used to the fact that we've got no gauge widening on any of the curves in the depot, and also in terms of sort of the application and in use of the check rail, which is sort of argument is it check rail, is it guardrail, in terms of a 55mm flange way, and that's again a discussion I've had with DLR engineering and probably will continue. And then in particular, I guess the only thing that was particularly challenging in terms of my involvement was in relation to following through on a derogation required for the track tolerances. So on the track slab, again, with the type of soil, the type of brownfield site that we've got, with a range of different sort of old foundations, etc., and there was concern essentially that there would be differential settlement on the slab track. It has been, it's a raw foundation, it's being built as a continuous slab, and although the settlements were relatively small, they were sufficient that when you look at the DLR standards and the tolerances that the track is allowed to move before it sort of is well outside the requirements, it wasn't necessarily making the track unsafe, and that it wasn't causing twist faults, but it would be a case that we would need to essentially re-baseline the design at some point in relation to the track settling if that happened, and obviously these are just predicted values. So this is just a brief sort of summary, essentially, as part of that derogation, something that I put together in terms of actually enabling the and having reviewed the maintenance standards, what the requirements of CAD were in terms of monitoring the track themselves, at what points we would then look to start re-baselining in terms of the track, rather than saying that there was actually something wrong here and that physical works were required. And then finally, in terms of the MFB works, so again, this design has particularly only really just been agreed to, no bars to acceptance, but it essentially, obviously the MFB, the maintenance facility building, is the new maintenance facility for the B23 stock, it mirrors pretty much in terms of what it's able to do to the existing train shed. So it has one lifting road with embedded rail, a pit road, in which we've used Hopan base plates, and is a way of actually sort of trying to maximise the pit width. It did mean that we've ended up changing to 113 A rail here because of the base type base plate itself, and elsewhere. Sorry, I'm losing my train. Elsewhere, we've kept the track vertical, the rail vertical. So likewise, in terms of the swimming pool roads, where sort of access is required all the way around the train, we've just used a Lindap to fix rail fixing. And generally, I think one of the key things was just to try and make sure we weren't necessarily introducing anything that was too new and novel. And again, DLR has ended up with the way that it's been built, with lots of different track form types and componentry, and trying to keep something that was pretty similar to what's already in the depot for the maintainer. So when the original AIP design was done, it essentially was a very standard sort of entrance to the depot, utilising the sort of CV40s, SVCV40s, in terms of the S&C and geometry with 40-metre radii into the MFB. Yeah, I hope you can see it just in terms of the green track that's underneath. But both in terms of gapping, we're looking at sort of the Conrail arrangement, and in particular the bringing trains into and out of the sheds. It's sort of the gapping situation relating to it just made it unfeasible. So we did also look at using the unequal splits with the 55-metre radius, so that we could get Conrail on the insides of the curve. But even in those respects, when you looked at the need, the requirement in terms of adding the depot protection system, and also in terms of, again, bringing trains out and getting them onto Conrail away from the shore supply, it just meant that the arrangement and the layout didn't quite work. So we've ended up with a bit of a S-curve coming into the MFB, but it's found that it's basically the only situation that we could get it all to work, and so that's currently that's what we're looking to install at the moment as part of the design. So, and the other thing that particularly changed between the AIP was the need and understanding of the need for the train delivery road. So when the trains do come in, they'll come in by road, and we'll need to sort of come in via the main Armada Way entrance, across and up in towards the maintenance infrastructure building. So a large sort of straight area of track in front of the MFB was required. So we do end up with an S&C unit right at the shed entrance. So again, shed doors just needing to be ensure that they're clear in terms of the throws associated with it. As I said before, we're also going to have the issue in terms of actually accessing the MFB, and that will end up needing to be crossing the then constructed test track, and the timescales required for that. So that's a challenge that's also currently being looked at, as well as the interfaces between the different design, between the northern siding and the maintenance building. So a key sort of part of my role and what I've been involved with has required a huge amount of collaboration with DLR engineering, and they've been really good in terms of helping smooth the way through for the design. So as I say, early on, was very happy that we managed to get pushed through a number of changes to in the standard. So DLR standards originally didn't have any differentiation between mainline and depot track. So again, in terms of tolerances or in terms of the use of the sort of sleeper types, etc., it sort of just made life significantly more difficult. So I think there's still a way to go on that. I think there's extra things that need to be added. But in particular, we managed to push through the use of composite timbers for depot S&C, which enabled the northern sidings S&C units to be sort of built with that. And one of the problems that we're now having is that the S&C that we had constructed for the southern sidings, which have now been stored for quite a long time, have ended up to do some of the timbers developing splits. So we're currently just sort of doing a survey of all the S&C that we've got and any particular bearers that we want to swap out now, essentially before they go in. But they've just been sitting out of ballast and obviously have not stood up overly well, a couple of the bearers. So yeah, issues that we've have had to deal with. Again, DLR have been great, as I say, in terms of clarification of standards. Sometimes I know the DLR is light railway and is not the same as LU, but the reference to Network Rail standards often it doesn't really make sense. So again, I think going forward, that's something I hope that we can work with, and if that's something that can get changed, and also some additional sort of clarification or detail to go into the standards. I've also been pestering them in terms of existing componentry used, and likewise the track managers from CAD have also been great in terms of helping me out with bits like that, sort of discussions about IRJs and what we should be using, and drillings. I mean, even just the fact that sort of on DLR that you don't change the base plate type, you change the drillings for whether it's a tight joint or an expansion joint, different from what I've been used to on NU. They've also obviously sort of been doing the review themselves, and also in terms of review of derogations that we've been putting together, and also in terms of giving us access to data in terms of the track impact study. But in particular, I've just been really good to share data and knowledge and experience, and it's been one of the real positives of being involved in the project. So as I say, we're playing S&C Jigsaw, and so this is part of the sort of setup that we had for the southern sidings, and we're now applying this to the northern. So yeah, so whereas all these units were due to be together, we're now separating them, and all of them have been pre-packed and packed into boxes, and the bearers taken away, and they're currently off-site in Essex on a farm, and so there's going to be a challenge in terms of ensuring that we get everything back together again. So it's a shame that the northern sidings has ended up being the first one. It's the biggest part of it. It's quite complicated, especially compared to the southern sidings. So it would have been nice as a project if we'd actually been able to cut our teeth on the southern sidings first and get the relationship set up. get the methodologies and processes agreed and people understand what they were doing. But as it is, we're going headlong into the northern sidings, and yeah, we'll get there. And space, as is sort of typical, you can see from the side, wasn't massive. So space in terms of storing materials, storing rail, all very limited. And we've also, in terms of the site, you see it in the photos to follow, because of the issues with contamination and also wanting to only drain from the top clean ballast, essentially raised drainage channels have been installed, and because they've been installed first in order to sort of get them in along with signal bases, etc., it's just meant that now with the track contractor trying to lay track, because of the network of drainage between the different roads, it's just a bit of a maze and a challenge for them to get to it. So we're on site, and this was a good year or so ago now. And from a track perspective, I say we've been very lucky in terms of sort of the site has been made sort of essentially completely level for all the sidings. So the groundworks have been done, and a lot of work is done in terms of preparing that sort of the main area. As you can see, this is still with the main fence line for the DLR existing depot in place. And then just before Christmas, we went down and to have a look at witness the CBR tests. And you can see here that, as I say, the building, a lot of the starting to build the concrete piers for the platforms, the driver access walkways, the lighting column, foundations and posts are going in, signal bases as well, and to the side here the drainage channels. So in terms, you can see how far will end up the track coming up, and so at the moment those are sort of sitting proud in terms of the track contractor coming in. And it's starting to lay ballast in between, and yeah, again in terms of sort of this is just in the area prior to breaking through into the main depot. And so say that connection, that fence has now changed over the last weekend, and so the amount of work and the extent of the works that can be done will start continuing. But essentially we're still to lay track. We haven't got any rails down on the ground, and yeah, I'm yet to exactly find out when that's going to happen. But yeah, my involvement will continue, and that was I'm sure that would be sort of going on for a good couple of years. So that's my presentation over. Thank you. I'm a little bit over an hour, and thank you for listening, and also thank you to all those people that have been helping me out with this. I've obviously learned a lot and continuing to learn a lot in terms of the DLR system, and that will continue, I'm sure, throughout the project. And so, and also this is just obviously just a snapshot of my involvement and the track, and it is obviously a massive project with many disciplines. So yeah, possibly we'll come back and give an update at a later time. So if you've got any questions, I've not been looking at the chats, I've seen stuff popping up, then yeah, please ask away.
As Tom's had to leave, so it's Mike Brown here instead looking. I've got a question from
you, Mike.
Paul Ebbett. He says, was any consideration given to using second-hand serviceable track for the new sidings?
It was. I mean, I think part of the problem we've got, I think, with DLR is that it's just about storage. I mean, we've been talking about, even with the existing track that's coming out, it's where do we then store it? So CAD and DLR are going to be looking at the existing rail that's coming out, any existing sleepers. But you know, the big question is, if there is stuff that's found, where do we then put it? Because there is so little space. So yeah, it has been considered, but the big question is about where that can go and how that's managed.
Okay, thank you. Another one from Paul Meads. He says, has any provision been made for rail lubrication as part of the new design?
So the DLR existing and the new stock has sort of direct stick lube lubrication. So generally we're not lubricating in the depot. So yeah, there's no existing lubrication, and we're not adding that to the depot, the new depot track either. So I'm not aware that I'm certainly not heard that they've got any existing or had any existing issues with the issue of lubrication, so needing anything additional.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to call on Mike Barlow, who should be on here somewhere, if he can do the vote of thanks for us.
Right. Hello, Mike. Can I have a sound check? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
My audio link has been dropping out, so I may disappear at some stage. Zoe, thank you very much for a splendid presentation. Depots are an important part of the railway infrastructure, but are sometimes overlooked, both for new projects and for maintenance. They are, of course, essential to the operation of the railway, and as you've shown, they are there to provide stabling and maintenance and engineering facilities. Many years ago, a wise old engineer once told me that when constructing a new railway or extending an existing one, if land cannot be found for the depot, then the railway cannot be built. So that's how important depots are, and people need to remember that. So as you've shown, depots are one of the most complex parts of the railway. Lots of junction work, very, very tight, frighteningly tight in the case of Docklands Light Railway. Non-standard track forms, again, as you've shown, swimming pool track, slab track, ballasted track, lots of different track forms, and heavy emphasis on the interfaces, again, as you have shown. So DLR is a success story, most definitely. And Zoe, you've shown that. You've shown how it's grown since its inception and how it will have to continue to grow to meet the future needs of East London. So thank you very much. And in closing, I'd just like to invite everyone to unmute their microphones and join me in some applause to thank Zoe for her presentation.
Sorry.